You always ask the questions nobody asks. So
And a lot of it's happening in my own house. Here.
because it rains so much. Yeah.
That's a good one.
But you're the only person ever who's ever asked me that question. Ever.
Do something fun, have a romance, maybe.
Wow, what a presentation.
I can show you my favorite tattoo.
I'm still laughing about that intro about Jurassic Park
Yes.
and elephants.
She still hasn't got any elephants, so it's a win-win so far.
Those things are always interesting just because I'm so like, scattered.
I find it so funny because we also met before the pandemic. We have a longer history.
Did you really bring that up? That was a private conversation.
I hope people keep thinking that I'm really relaxed while I'm playing and do not realize when I'm playing the difficult parts of the song.
That's a really good question. Again, Mark, yeah, man. Everybody needs to subscribe because Mark here, he asks really good questions. I'll go this way. There he is.
Art needs multiple voices to truly shine.
So that's when I say, okay, you need to really learn how to do it right.
It's bound to come out at one point. So this was what was coming out.
Oh, you sure you're not interested? I was like, don't ask me again. I can't refuse that twice.
A wrecking machine. I'll take it.
9 to 11 years to become a neurophysician.
Anytime I see a breakdown and then I'm like, that seems different, I'm in.
Be in their presence, so I conduct my life in a way that I hope that they want to be in my presence as well.
Come on for live stream interviews, and so I've saved. I don't want to say the best for last, but I saved the creator, which is the writer and director, who is my guest tonight. So let's get to things. My guest tonight is an award-winning filmmaker. His latest film is a beautifully realistic look at marriage called 7 Short Films About Our Marriage. Please welcome to the Eclectic Arts virtual studio, Professor Chris Hansen.
Hey.
Hi, Chris. How are you?
I'm well, thank you. How are you?
I am doing really good. I'm looking forward to a 3-day weekend.
Yes, for sure.
Yeah, but thank you so much for taking the time to talk with me about your film and your career. I really appreciate it.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks for asking.
Yeah, so let's start with 7 short films. As you know, I think during Drez's interview, I said I'd watched this your film 6 times.
Yes.
It's actually been 7 because I watched it on Sunday again. So,
you're going to start getting up into my numbers at some point.
Yeah, that's my goal. And so I'm kind of random with my questions sometimes. If people know with my notes, I don't really put out like, here's question number 1 for a guest, here's question number 2. I have like little bullet point things, and I kind of roll off of that. So for folks out there, if you haven't had a chance to see this, please be aware there's going to be some spoilers going through this this interview because there's things I want to ask that there's no way around it.
Yeah.
But I'm kind of curious with this film. Are parts of it autobiographical for you?
Yeah, I mean, so I've been married for almost 30 years, and it's I wanted to make a film about marriage because of my experience of marriage, which has been both wonderful and difficult at times, and also my impulse at one point was to write a film that was about how my wife and I actually met, which is told as the story of how the couple in this film met when they recount it during their reunion. So that's essentially the story of how my wife and I met. But I realized as I matured as a storyteller that really wasn't enough for a film, that idea of our meeting. But then I really wanted to do something about marriage because, they say write what you know, and I'm not a big believer in only writing things that you know, but my experience, I'm not an adventurer, and I'm not a spy, and I don't have that background, but I do have a background of somebody who's a husband and a father, and I wanted to do something about that because I think it's a more complex. The relationship between a husband and wife is more complex than a lot of movies recognize. I think people know that it is, but the movies often make it too simple. And so I wanted to do something a little deeper. So I, of course, started with my own marriage in a lot of ways. I'd say the first three parts of the movie have significant autobiographical elements in terms of the kinds of things my wife and I argued about when we were younger. Dealing with infertility, which is what part three is about. I'm not an African American man, as the lead character in the film is, and so the racial elements that make up the first part of the film are not something I personally experienced, but that was actually an attempt by deciding to make Noah an African American man instead of like me. Was an attempt to kind of tell a story that was not my own story, to distance myself from it, so it wasn't just me trying to tell my own story. Okay, and I'm glad you brought that up, because I was going to ask, was that intentional to have an interracial marriage? Yeah, the first impetus was just to make Noah different. He's an aspiring filmmaker who's gone to graduate school, he's getting married, or he's not gone to graduate school, he's gone to college at that point, he's getting married. And I thought, it was too much me. I was writing myself, and it was hard to create a character that wasn't just dealing with my own emotions and stuff. So I decided, what if I made him somebody completely different than me? Somebody who has had a completely different background. And once I decided he would be African American, then I had to honor that fact and allow race to play a role in the film. Ultimately, I think race plays a somewhat significant role, but it's not only about race, and that was something I wrestled with and talked with, friends who read scripts for me, specifically, several people of color that I wanted to, take their pulse on whether or not I was honoring that experience. Okay. Yeah. I for me as a viewer, I think that's one thing that I liked, that I felt it was an honest portrayal, but it didn't hit you over the head with it. Yeah. And you didn't spend the entire crux of the movie talking about this difference between Madison and Noah and then her dad and all that kind of. I mean, that's definitely an element, but it's not this huge, that's all it is. Right. Exactly. If it had, I probably would have tuned out after a while, to be honest with you. For sure. Yeah. One thing I wanted to do was honor that reality, but also it's a film about marriage, not just about interracial marriage, not just about racial issues. So, and one of the things that I thought was really interesting, when I had a friend of mine who's a fellow filmmaker, and he's an African American, and his wife is white, and he read it and he said, it really resonated with him, because he felt like when they got married, they had the same kinds of things said to them as are said to this couple about race and interracial children. And he said, none of that was our problem. Our problems were the more typical, marriage problems that people run into. And they have a good, healthy marriage and have been married for a long time. But the point was, and Drez echoed this when I cast him and we talked about the script, Drez said, I'm glad that it wasn't only about race, because part of my identity is definitely the fact that I'm a Black man, but that's not the only part of my identity. That's not all of who I am. And so I thought that was really profound. Yeah, so getting that feedback from your filmmaker friend who is living that situation and can tell you that, no, it's really more about what every other couple has gone through, the ups and downs of marriage. And then also getting Drez's feedback too about the character, then it kind of gives you, okay, well, I must have been on the right track then about what I want to put out there. Yeah, because I think people read it. I think people come to a film like this or the script if they're reading the script from their own perspective. So, one of my producers read it and he just thought of it from, well, I've had these exact same arguments with my wife. Like, it really resonated with him. Drez comes at it from partially from, being African American and that part of the experience. And, I think China came at it from obviously her perspective as a woman in relationships. And so I think the viewers do the same thing. Yeah. And I think that's why for me, and I've said this to other people here locally that I've talked to you about, when they say Mark, what's one of the films that you've reviewed that you think I should check out? I always talk about your film. I said, good, thank you. Yeah, I think you can relate to it. And you don't have to be married. You don't have to have these, if you've been in any kind of relationship and have gone through ups and downs in your own life, you can relate to this film. Yeah. That's the thing is, I think that, I specifically make it a marriage, but any relationship has these kinds of ups and downs, especially in a relationship that lasts any significant amount of time.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one thing that for me in the 7 times that I've watched it is that I really like a lot of the dialogues, particularly when Madison, played by China, will kind of come back at Noah's character. Like if he says something, she doesn't just accept it. She kind of says, well, what do you mean by that? Kind of a tone to it. And there's a lot of that through the film. And it's like, that seems so real.
Yeah. I felt like, I did not try to remember actual conversations I had with my wife, but the spirit of them, which is, and this is, my wife in an argument, arguments in movies, somebody gets a last word and it's always like the most intelligent or, wittiest or cleverest thing. And in my marriage, I'm pretty witty and clever and I can come up with those things, but that's never the last word because my wife doesn't just accept the clever comment as a way to end an argument or end a difficult conversation. We keep going. When we were first married, we had this belief, which we've adjusted quite a bit, of never letting the sun go down on your anger. And so I was such a believer in that I would, argue until 2 or 3 in the morning because I didn't want us to go to bed angry. And it never worked. The reality I had to come to was to realize you should go to sleep on the anger because when you wake, everything will look very different. And so, so I would have, when I was younger, I would have the kinds of arguments with my wife that they have in the movie, and it never ends because you just keep going because you believe you have to win the argument. 30 years into marriage, it's not so much about winning the argument, it's about relationship. Sometimes the argument doesn't really matter.
Interesting. I'll have to remember that.
You can lose the argument when you win the argument sometimes. So.
Okay, well, I'm curious too about since you wrote this screenplay, how long did it take you to write this entire screenplay?
The first draft was probably 3 or 4 weeks. I wrote it pretty quickly. Once I had the idea for having these vignettes that make up the film, then it was just a matter of like determining what life events those vignettes were centered around, and that was how I structured it and wrote it out. I just, like, okay, first one is their wedding day. That's easy. Second one is originally they were in. He was in graduate school at the time, and they were struggling with money, which very much resonated with my experience. Later, we decided to have him out of school and trying to, make his first project. But so things like, it was just structured around those ideas. Like, as we dip in and out of their lives, what's the event that's causing stress at this point? So it's the wedding, it's the money, it's infertility, and then how do you build the scenes around those events and the reality of dealing with those things. Like we dealt with infertility when we were younger, and it was stressful and sad and upsetting and it was crazy. So I remembered those emotions and just tried to bring that to it. So yeah, I wrote it in about, I think, first draft in about 3 or 4 weeks, and then so that was the summer 2017, and then we were planning then to shoot it summer of 2018. So as we were like this, it didn't change like drastically in that time. There were a number of changes in the script, but there was rewriting, kind of going on in bits and pieces throughout the next 6 months.
Okay, well, and being a professor at Baylor, did that have any impact in terms? It sounds like it did in terms of how you got this film made, or did you have to? Okay.
Yeah, for sure. What we do, and I've made 5 films this way at Baylor, is we offer it as a class for our students to learn how to actually work on a set. And of course, they're making projects throughout the year in their classes, but it's quite different when you're in a concentrated film production for 4 weeks. That's your job basically every day, as opposed to like, okay, we have to shoot a project over this weekend, So it's a way to kind of create a workshop setting where they're actually learning And for us, our students are not like interns getting coffee. They're our crew. They are the grips, and they are camera assistants, and they are sound assistants, and they're learning those roles. And so we hire department heads, the sound recordist and the cinematographer, and those folks who are committed to mentoring the students and teaching the students. Often they're alums. Some of them are alums who actually did this as students and then came back and work as professionals to teach students how to do it. So it's a really rewarding experience. It does add some stress in terms of students having to learn on the job. But what we give up in experience, we gain in enthusiasm.
Okay, I like that, and I like the fact that for the students there, that they're getting a hands-on experience of like, this is what it could be like when you, like you said, here's 4 weeks and we're actually doing this, day by day or whatever, just doing something for this project. Now you got the next assignment, then you got this other one and this other thing over here.
Right.
And I a long time ago, I worked as a teacher in the public school system, not for doing films, but just in general. So I've always spent a lot of time working with youth of all ages, and I worked at a college for a little bit of time too. So there's nothing like letting them actually get in there and do something instead of like, lecturing can only get you so far.
Yeah. So in our program, it's like, there's like theory and practice, and we really believe in both of those working together. And then there's like, so they're making stuff, but there's making stuff on your own. And then there's making stuff with a small group of students for a class project. And then there's making something, of a larger scope. And obviously we're not making something that's a Hollywood level production in terms of budget or scope. But we are, we're all professionals who know what we're doing, and much bigger scope than the students could ever manage on their own. So that experience of really being on a set 10 hours a day, in the Texas heat, unfortunately, and because we always shoot in the summers and we're in Texas. It's something that you just can't mimic that in the classroom or in a class project. So, it's not a requirement that our students do this, but for the ones who do, they come out of it with it's so eye-opening in both good ways and bad. I mean, I shouldn't use the word bad. It's always good to me if you come out of an experience like this and realize you want to spend the rest of your life doing this. It's also good if you come out of an experience like this and realize that's not for me. And some of our students have, we've had students on both sides of that. And I think it's a win either way, because the student got this experience. And if they don't like it, then they're not chasing something that they're ultimately not going to like for years to come. They've had that experience. They know it's not for them.
Yeah, no, I'm having flashbacks to when I was in college. And I remember they put us into an elementary school for a quarter. And it was basically you're testing to see, is this really the career you want?
Yeah.
Or do you want to switch your major to something else? Because now it's early enough in your program that you can do it and it won't really harm you.
Smart.
Yeah. And I remember spending time with these little second graders and all this kind of thing. And like, I'm not really sure if I want to do it.
Yeah. I don't know how elementary school teachers do it. I would never have the energy. My second daughter is an elementary education minor in college right now, and she's having that same experience, but it's all been positive. She loves it. And, but she's been in the classroom for a year already. And, as part of her studies, and just, I think it's really important that you have that experience.
Yeah, I'm looking back, I'm so thankful that I had that, which then led me to a practicum, led me to other things before I got to student teaching. Because if I had not gotten that taste, I would have been in my 3rd year before I ever actually got into a classroom around actual live kids to see, this is what it could be like for you, even just for an hour a day. It's still like,
right. Not 7 or 8 hours a day.
Yeah, this is overwhelming. So, but I was going to ask, again, I kind of have a random mind, but with your film and making this particular film, there's a line in the dialogue when Noah talks about, kind of playfully, that he can't believe that Madison has never seen The Godfather. And with that, is that purposely put in there because of you being a film professor and everything else?
Yeah. So my wife and I have vastly different interests in film and television. Not completely. I enjoy watching procedural shows like Law and Order and stuff like that, and so does she. But when it comes to movies, my tastes are, fairly esoteric. In college, I got really into foreign films and art films, and then I'm half Italian, so we grew up with the Italian side of the family around us all the time. So like The Godfather was a movie we'd watch every Christmas, and so for me, The Godfather is like an essential text. And my wife, I don't think she's ever seen it. I'm not sure if I remember having that conversation, but she has no interest in it whatsoever. So that's just it. That was reflective of the kind of relationship my wife and I have, which is she's not interested in that, and I am. But that doesn't mean we don't love each other. That's just some of our interests.
Yeah, you can't have all the same likes and things if you're
exactly
that doesn't work.
No.
But yeah, there's definitely. So are there like family members or close friends or your colleagues at Baylor that have watched the film and said, that's Chris, that's a Chris thing?
I'm trying to think. And I think of course my wife did. And yeah, I think I have two colleagues at Baylor who were producers on the film, Dan and Brian, and Dan especially was the one who read it and it really resonated. He was the first one who read it. And I think, it's funny because I think he could see me and my relationship with my wife in it, but he also just saw himself and his relationship with his wife. And I was like, well, okay, that's a win, because that's what I'm going for is it not being about me, although you might, if you know me, see some of those elements, but I want you to see yourself in it.
Okay. All right. Well, before we end up the live stream down the road here, we will come back to like some of your favorite films, because I definitely want to find what that is. But we'll come back to that part. I want to stay with 7 short films right now. So my understanding is that China was someone that was part of the Baylor campus, but then Dres was not. So how did you what were you looking for, and how did you end up with both of those wonderful actors?
Yeah. So what are you looking for? So we put this on Backstage, the online casting site. And, I listed these 2 roles and also the character of the father, Madison's father, because that was a significant enough role. Even though he only appears in one segment, it's a significant appearance. He has a lot to say. And in fact, in the script, his speech to Noah was a lot longer. We ended up having to cut it down for time. But so honestly, I had a vision in my head of what Madison looked like, for example. But then as like we started getting resumes and headshots from actresses, a lot of them obviously didn't look like just the person in my head, the imaginary person I saw in my head. So I just opened my mind and said, if they can act, can they be the character? Can they bring the emotion to the character? And that's really hard. There are a lot of actors out there who are great, but there's a lot of actors out there who just can't kind of take it to that next level. And so I watched a lot of video auditions, and Dan and I would spend hours in my office watching video auditions and kind of debating, should we take another look at this person? And so one of my other colleagues, who's also a filmmaker, had made a couple of short films with China in it, and in both of them. And he said, look, you need to take a look at China. I think she'd be great. My concern about China was not her ability, which was clear to me, but she has a very young look. She could easily play a 16-year-old. She's in her mid-20s. So I was afraid that she could play Madison at the beginning, but could she play her 14 years later, in segment 7? And I just wasn't sure about that. So I know she mentioned that there was a long period of time from when she auditioned to when she got either a callback or eventually got the part. And that was me wrestling with, this is a big decision. and she was great in her video audition. But I would show it to people and say, how old do you think this person looks? And, because we were trying to make sure she looked older. So I pulled the trigger on it because she was just so good. And just felt like we'll find a way to make her look older. And I think the makeup artist who we had did a great job of very subtly aging her over the years. So And Drez, yeah, so she had been at Baylor, but wasn't at Baylor any longer. She was out in California. And then Drez was a friend of a friend. He had appeared in a film by a friend of mine, somebody who I'd gotten to know over the past few years. And I just mentioned to him what I was casting, and he said, you should take a look at this guy. He's only in one scene in my film, but he's got it. And I had Drez video audition and thought he was fantastic. Then I did of course, he was in North Carolina at the time, and she was in California, and I was in Texas. But I really wanted to see them together. So, and this was pre-Zoom, because this was 2017. Zoom hadn't been invented, or at least we weren't aware of it, and the pandemic hadn't happened. But we had Skype, and so we did a 3-way Skype call where they played the scene together, even though they weren't in the same room. And they brought me to tears in the audition together. So I knew that I'd had the right people.
Okay, yeah, no, I remember Skype.
Yeah, nobody uses it anymore, but
yeah, a lot of the band interviews that were offered to me say, hey, you can do a Skype one. I was like, why would I do that if I can do it in person when they get here? And here we are now. It's like I'm doing them right now through another platform. But no, you definitely found the right people, because those two actors with their chemistry together, and you know this being the writer and director of it, I mean, they have to carry the film. They have to. And if one of them's kind of a weak link or just isn't quite, gelling with the other one, all's really kind of lost from my point of view as a viewer.
Yeah, that's the problem when you write a film that's essentially a two-hander, that it's just, it's just the two of them most of the time, or one of them or the other. And if either of them's not good, you're in trouble.
Yeah, I when I first watched it, I was flashbacking to a play that I saw here locally, and it was basically two actors. And I was like, going into it, I was like, how are they going to do this for 2 hours with just two actors? And in that particular case, that play was awesome. They were amazing actors, and they just had me like glued to everything they said. But then I saw another one, something similar, where there's two actors and there's like 2.5 actors, and it completely fell apart because one of the leads just couldn't hold a candle to the other person. So it's completely not, on the same level, and it just kind of started falling apart. But yeah, as soon as I watched probably really that first scene of them before they get married, it's like, okay, I already know this is going to work. Just as a viewer, so I'm interested. I want to see the quality of it, the realism of it, and it just stayed that way through the entire film.
Well, I'll take it as a compliment to me, but mostly it's a compliment, and I think this is how you mean it to them. They're just really good actors, and I think as I've matured as a director, I went to film school and I wanted to be a director. I wanted to be Francis Ford Coppola or Martin Scorsese, and these were filmmakers that I really admired, and I still do admire them. But my misconception about directing was that it was like, I know how everything's going to go, and I'm going to tell you, do it this way, say it this way, walk over there and do the thing. The reality now as a director, I want to, so I have a way that I see it in my head, certainly. And it's good in my mind, but I realize from working with talented actors that actors bring so much to the table. And sometimes it's writing, and I've worked with actors who helped me, write the script, even when I cast them before the script was done, and they worked on it with me. But sometimes it's like, as with this film, it's allowing the actors for the words to be. So if I write a speech and Drez has to say it, well, I know I can say it because I wrote it, but Drez's mouth says words differently than mine. And so the words have to come out of his mouth in an organic way. And so you have to allow for an actor it's not about changing the script, because I can tell you that, like, for example, in the long speeches, it's 95% written exactly as it is said, but there's that 5% where somebody is putting it in their own voice. And then there's times when the actors come to you and say, what if we did this? Or they just do it in a way that is better than you could have imagined. So I really look at working with actors as a collaboration. And I'm grateful that, if you cast really good actors, as I was able to do in this film, they bring so much more to it than if they just do what you say.
No, that makes sense to me. I know one of the directors I interviewed, I guess that was last year, was talking about that. if what did he say? I'm trying to remember how you put it. He said, Mark, if you ever meet someone that says there's only one way to make a movie, run.
For sure. For sure. I mean, if you made this movie with the exact same script, it would be a completely different movie, and it might be a great movie. You know, we all bring different things to the table, and you know, I really believe in casting good actors and listening to them.
See, that reminds us. I did almost 10 years of photography working with models. So to me, and I wasn't into the whole fashion, you know, 5'9" type of thing. It was like, well, I want to collaborate on some artistic ideas. So I actually do want to listen to what you have to say, because that's how we get to that next level that I'm looking for. It's not
exactly.
it's not me dictating to you every little detail and put your arm like this and your finger like that, and you know, that doesn't work for me. And for the most part, the models found it refreshing.
Yeah, I think that same with actors. I you know, they've certainly worked with other directors who do this thing well, but I'm sure a lot of actors have worked with directors who are more dictatorial. And look, you know, if you're talking like the most dictatorial director, probably is Stanley Kubrick, you know, by reputation. I'm not like I ever saw him direct, but and so you can't argue with his results. But I feel like for me, allowing the other creative people around you to, and that's not just the actors, it's like the director of photography. I could tell the director of photography, I want this, but my director of photography on my last two films is the same person on both films. He's pushing to do certain things because he thinks it's going to be better. And sometimes I'm resistant. And often when I see the final result, I'm like, yeah, I'm glad you did that. So it's better because there's another creative person bringing something to the table.
Yeah, it's that creative back and forth.
Exactly.
And there's been umpteen bands that are like that. You got like two guys that write all the songs, and then the third and fourth guy say, "Hey, what about us?"
Yeah,
and sometimes
I don't know if you. I have no idea if you like the Beatles or not. I love the Beatles, and this is like when we talked about different tastes. Like my wife doesn't care for the Beatles at all, and I love them. I watched Get Back, the documentary about the album, the creation of Let It Be, and it's exactly what you're talking about. It's guys just sitting around talking, and they obviously have respect for each other's game, but they also think they're right about certain things, and the tension. There's a lot of tension as they work through those things, and in the end, though, they have this beautiful thing that's a result of all of them working together. It's a hard process sometimes.
Yeah, I've been in a few bands in my lifetime. Definitely some collaborative situations, and sometimes that creative tension yields the best results.
Yeah, and sometimes the band breaks up.
that too. And kind of speaking of that, for your film, and when you think back about it, and what was it like for you when you finally had the version that was put out there for the world to see? What did you think of it? What did your close family and friends think of it?
I mean, I'm very proud of the film. It was hard to get to the final version because there were a number of, so I don't think we did cut a couple of scenes out, but mostly it was cutting things down. For example, I mentioned the scene with Madison's father talking to Noah, and that was a much longer scene. And the actor really did a great job with it. And then I hated having to tell him we had to cut a significant portion of that down. And he was like, no, I get it. What's best for the film? But like getting to that process of cutting those things down is just painful for me because, you know, in my mind, everything I wrote was there for a reason and everything is valuable. And I don't want to cut anything, but you know, it's just running way too long. The first cut was 2 hours and almost 20 minutes long, which was never going to be the final length. But you know, looking at it like an indie film, an indie relationship film should not be 2 hours and 20 minutes long, unless I don't know, you're Richard Linklater, in which case, you know, go for it. But even his relationship films that are similar to this are not over 2 hours. So, you know, it was the two things that were really hard for me in terms of cutting were that scene with the father, because I loved kind of the dialogue that I'd written there and the way the actor delivered it. And then the scene at the college reunion where they're telling their story of how they met, which, as I mentioned, is very much close to the story of how my wife and I met. And there was a lot more detail in their story of their relationship in the script and in the version we shot. The editor kept telling me, I don't think we need this much. I don't think we need this. And the reality is that scene, so that whole sequence at the college reunion is about, I think, 13 minutes in the final film. The cut with everything in it, which I really liked, was like 21 minutes. And so we cut 7 minutes of stuff out of there. And it wasn't like huge chunks. It was like, we cut a sentence here and a sentence there. But there were details that I had to agree once I agreed to these cuts and said, let's try it, I could see that it moved along at a quicker pace. And the things we lost were hard for me to lose because I knew what those meant. They were part of my life, but they really didn't mean anything in the grand scheme of things to the audience watching the film. The gist of what needed to be said was already said. So it was, and that's the hard part of writing something that has some autobiographical elements to it. Is, to me, every detail seems really important because they were my history. But when you realize that everybody doesn't need to know every little detail, as long as they know the story as a whole. And so that was the difficult part for me, getting rid of certain things.
That's interesting. I wouldn't even thought about that, but it makes perfect sense that if it's something that is pieces of your life, and you're thinking, no, this needs to be in here because this happened. But then you're thinking, well, what about if I step outside of myself? Well, no, this really doesn't need to be in there to tell the story at the right pace or whatever I want to get across to the audience.
Yeah,
but that's got to be painful.
It is very painful. I mean, it's painful. Like, everything you write and then shoot and you love it. You fall in love with the stuff while you're making it. You're like, we got it. We got that scene perfect. And then your editor's like, I don't think we need it. It's like, well, yes, we do. And I resisted for quite a long time. And then at some point, kind of the scales fell away and I was like, okay, let's cut. Because it just needed to be shorter. It was just too long. I'm a big believer in making indie films efficient storytelling machines. And, it wasn't that, and you could argue it's still not that because it's a relationship film that lingers on dialogue a lot. But that's what I make. I knew it had to be shorter, and I just kind of, I don't know why, because the editor had been saying it, and then one day he just said it, and I was like ready to do it. Like let's cut into the scene, and then I was like, yeah, cut that. Can we cut that? So it's hard, but then I think you just kind of you finally see it through somebody else's eyes in a way, and that convinces you to make the changes.
There's a little bit of that creative tension we were just talking about.
Yeah, for sure. I had that with the editor for sure, and he's another colleague, but we didn't see eye to eye on the story and the characters to a degree, and that was frustrating at first. But then, as he started to mold it, understanding what my vision was, he was editing the film that I wanted to make, but he was also, saying, what about this? Because, he found the characters at times in the edit to be unlikable. And so he was concerned about that. And I disagreed with him because of, we had fundamental disagreements about the nature of the relationship of the characters, but the tension was good. It made me have to either really defend what was there or to think about changing it.
Yeah, no, it's, I mean, for me, I kind of keep going back to music references, but I think about when bands get to a point and they decide to self-produce an album. And it kind of becomes like, there's a reason why that producer made you sound the way you did. And then now you think you know better because I've sold 5 million records or whatever it is. I'm on my 6th release. So I'm going to do this and I'm not going to listen to anybody else. And then it sounds like crap.
Yep. For sure. When I don't listen to somebody else, when I don't listen to the other voices around me who are people that I trust, if I'm not listening to them, and that happened actually with this film too, because of the first draft, the other producer, Brian, had a bunch of notes that I just wasn't ready to hear. Like I didn't change those things. And then, I had future conversations with other people that were very similar. They gave very similar notes. And I think at that point it was further in the process and I was just ready to hear those notes. But it took me a while to come to terms with, okay, that needs to change. The first person who said it wasn't enough for me, but the third person who said it was enough.
No, that makes sense. And I think any creative person out there kind of knows, depending on, no matter how gentle the constructive criticism is, depending on where you are in the process, you're just, you said, you're not ready to hear it then, but then maybe further into the process and from different sources that you also trust or respect, you kind of like, well, there might be something to this, and I may need to revisit. But yeah, timing is a big thing when it comes to people saying, you know what, Mark, I don't like how you did this. I don't want to hear that shit right now. Get out of here.
For sure. It's not, and that's just a personal thing. It's just I'm not great at taking notes on scripts. I recognize that. It doesn't mean I don't eventually realize that some of those notes make a lot of sense. But it can make things difficult with those people who are giving you notes when you're like, no, I'm not going to do any of that. And they feel like, what was the point of asking me if you didn't want to actually hear me? But it's all good in the end, because ultimately those things lodge in your head and they stick with you, and you eventually start to hear them.
Yeah, no, for sure. And as you mentioned, that you're very, very proud of the film, which you should be. What was like your wife's reaction to it when she saw it?
She really liked it. It's interesting. She didn't, we worked on this for so long, and my wife's not a huge film buff. She's more of television is more her speed in terms of attention span and time. She just doesn't get into longer narratives as much. Not that she doesn't see movies. It's just not her first preference. So she didn't watch it until we had our first virtual screening. So, because she doesn't normally go to film festivals, we have kids, and it's so she hadn't been to the premiere. We premiered this right before the pandemic started. I mean, literally, our premiere happened, and then in the middle of that festival, the festival shut down as the pandemic started in March 2020. So we went with virtual festivals through most of the run, and our first virtual festival, it was we were going to watch it in the living room, and then I was going to do a Q&A on Zoom afterward. And so she and my daughter, one of my daughters, or maybe two of my daughters, watched it, and I think they really liked it. They got emotional and at times, and so that to me means they were connecting with the characters.
Yeah, no, that again, for me, after the first scene, I already knew this was like, okay, yeah, I'm in. I want to see where this ride goes. I want to see this journey.
Good.
And the narrative, and my mom was the same way, because she liked it too as soon as I told her about it. And I don't know if she really watches a lot of things. I don't know if she just kind of tunes me out. But she told me that she really liked that film. And that when you told me about with the marriage and stuff, so I watched it, and yeah, she really enjoyed it. So
tell her I said thank you.
Yeah, she might even be watching this. She watches most of my life. Hi, Mom. Watching right now. So as we're getting closer to kind of wrapping this up in, like, say, the next 10 minutes or so, what are you working on now?
I am working on something. I've been, I don't know, you seem to be thriving, through the pandemic and with the show and other endeavors. I found it very hard once the pandemic started to get creative. So I've gone through kind of a creative dip. I'm coming out of it now, and I have a couple of ideas, but I haven't developed anything to the point of, I'm definitely going to write that. And I have one script that a friend sent me that he had written and wanted me to direct. And so I'm considering doing that as my next project instead of something I've written, which I've mostly directed stuff I've written. My previous film, Blur Circle, was based on an idea that I had, but somebody else wrote it because I kind of couldn't get it over the finish line. And I handed it off to one of my producers, who's also a writer, and he just did a fantastic job with it. But that was a challenge. That was the first time I'd ever directed something I hadn't written, and it was unique. It was a different experience because you really have to get inside a script to direct it, and if you wrote it, you really are already inside it. If you didn't write it, even if you were there for the whole process, you read every draft, you don't understand everything that the writer is trying to do intimately the way they do. So that's why I'm considering directing this thing that a friend wrote, but I'm just kind of like, there's that hesitation of, do I really understand this deeply enough to direct it? And then I get a flood of ideas that I want to do, and I just, I got to sit down and write. But I'm also a full-time academic, and I have 4 kids, 3 of which who are still under the roof, and well, one's at college, one is old enough to have moved out now, and 2 younger ones still with us. So full-time life. So I'm trying to make time for some creative endeavors too.
Yeah, no, you definitely are trying to find that balance.
It's hard. Yeah. I used to, when I was younger, be able to just tune everything out and write for hours at a time. I find that's harder. And because I'm chair of the film department, my time is often co-opted by meetings and administrative work that I have to do. And so I can't just close my door for a day. I can really, the truth is I can do that. I'm using it as an excuse. I can do that certain days, but I used to be able to do it any given day that I wanted to, aside from teaching classes. And now I don't have that luxury. So.
Yeah, and it reminds me of my day job, where there's certain smaller out of the way conference rooms, and some of I know some of the staff, because I've talked to them and said, I see you sneaking down to that room to get away from your office because they can't ever get anything done.
Yeah, that's my problem. I'm a very open door person in my office, and because I'm the chair, I have a lot of traffic of faculty and staff coming in and either asking a question or wanting to talk about something. And I'm not saying that as a negative thing. It's a relational thing. Like most of these people are my friends, and I want to talk to them, but it means I get very little. I don't get that concentrated time where I'm gonna write for 2 hours without interruption. That's hard for me to do these days. So.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And as I kind of mentioned earlier, I am curious, especially with your film background and everything that you've been doing, what are some of your favorite films off the top of your head?
So we mentioned The Godfather. The Godfather is one of my all-time favorite films, and I like The Godfather 2 as well. But there's something, and Godfather 2 is often cited as the better film because it's so much more complex, and but I find the first film to be much more just satisfying on a general level as entertainment, as a great film. So the first Godfather is definitely one of them. In college, and grad school, got into kind of the foreign film, the European tours of, the 50s and 60s. And so, like most directors, I fell in love with Fellini's 8.5 because it's about a director. And so Fellini's 8.5 is definitely one of those films for me. And Bergman's Seventh Seal is also, these are like seminal, like everybody cites these, but they're just that good. And not to cite a very obvious one, and this film is not everybody likes it, even though it's at the top of the the lists every year, but Citizen Kane is just brilliant to me. I can watch Citizen Kane over and over. When I teach scenes from Citizen Kane, I'm just bowled over by how brilliant the photography is in it. I like more contemporary stuff. This is not that contemporary, but Clint Eastwood's Unforgiven, I think, is a brilliant deconstructionist Western that I just fell in love with. And then lately, in addition to, there's a lot of great film coming out. I am a bit of I loved Marvel Comics growing up. so seeing these stories come to life in such a quality way. And I know, look, Marvel's not for everybody. There's some people who think that every superhero movie is really shallow. I disagree. And I think that the Marvel universe is just something that has sucked me in completely because of that love of Marvel Comics I had as a kid. If I were doing this in my office, you would see like Marvel figures and Marvel Pez dispensers all over the office. But I'm at my house right now. So I'm kind of digging the expanding Marvel universe, and that's kind of, as you say, that's my jam. So like, television series, great. Hawkeye was a load of fun. The new Spider-Man movie, I loved it, So that's the thing for me, I can get into that pop culture, popular stuff as much as I can get into, an art film or a foreign film or, a great Western. My tastes are just good stories about people that I'm interested in.
Okay. Well, I appreciate the fact that that your taste is so broad and so all over the place. And I'm with you because I think back to when I was growing up, buying comic books of both Marvel and DC, and thinking as a kid back then, it's like, man, if they ever made this into a movie, this would be so awesome. And then it finally started happening with Iron Man, and then you watch like just expand like crazy, and like this is so awesome that they've gotten to a point. And I don't watch like every single Marvel movie at this point, but so many of those foundational ones were so good.
Yeah.
And they cast actual actors in them and all the other pieces put around. It's like, gosh, this is what, as a kid, I would have just been going nuts for. And then as an adult, I still like them.
For sure. And not every one of them is a, a grand slam for sure. I know some people really didn't like Eternals that came out this year or last year. I liked it. I liked it more than I'd say the average person, but I also liked it because it was just so different from all the other Marvel films in tone, in pacing. I'm like, great, let's do that. Let's do like the comics do that. The comics aren't all the same thing. So let's do a movie that's more like an art film and it's directed by Chloe Zhao. They don't all have to be the same. And the argument has always been all the Marvel movies are the same. And then they make one that's more of a, tone poem or an art film. And then people complain because it's too slow. I'm like, well, there's something for everybody out there. So.
No, that's a really good point. And I think if you're really watching those films, anyone would be able to tell you that they are not the same. There's elements that might be running through them that remind you of other things in the other Marvel films, but they are not the same.
No, and there's an emotional through line with these characters that tracks from movie to movie with most of the characters that I think is really interesting. You mentioned Iron Man, the Tony Stark character and the journey he goes on in the 12 years of films is a powerful one, and it's an interesting one, and it's a character who changes from film to film in certain ways and responds to trauma that he's experienced. I find that interesting to track over many films. I don't want everything to be a universe. I don't want every movie to be now. They tried to do the dark universe of horror films and that didn't pan out. Like, I don't need everything to be a universe. I like that this is because I think it's really well done. But I also just like I want to go see Spider-Man. Well, Spider-Man's a bad example. There's a ton of movies out this year that I want to go see, but thanks to the virus, I'm not back in theaters. I was back in theaters now, not so much. So.
You and me both.
Yeah, it's sad. I've been going to we have like most towns, we have a brand new theater, a theater that's a few years old, and then the really old theater. So the really old theater I've been going to because the projection and sound is fine. Seating's a little bit, old, but nobody goes there. So I went to see Spider-Man there with my kids, and there were like 5 other people in the theater, and everybody was like, how did you get an empty theater to see Spider-Man? Like, go to the old theater in town. Nobody goes to that theater. So
and I still haven't seen the new Spider-Man yet, so
I'm glad I didn't spoil it then. So unless you've already been spoiled, it's been out there. So
I've been spoiled somewhat, but I'm okay with that part of it. I kind of knew what was coming with the multiverse and all that kind of thing, but
sure.
Yeah, maybe I'll see it this weekend. Who knows? Since we have, well, no, I won't because of the virus.
Yeah, I know. It's really bad here right now. You guys are probably like, have you already peaked in Seattle? No, you haven't peaked yet.
All we keep hearing about is a new record day of cases.
Yeah, okay, that's where we are too. So
yeah, it jumped from like 8 to 10 to I think 15,000 in a day or something ridiculous.
Oh, gosh.
Yeah, so it's like, and I work in a place where I'm one of the people responsible for disinfecting for COVID. So I have to think twice about, so I do this for 8 hours a day, and then I go put myself amongst a bunch of strangers in a place that probably isn't the best thing to be doing. So we'll get there. That's all I keep telling myself.
I know. I read a lot of pessimistic things, but I also read the optimistic things that say this might be the last big surge of the pandemic, and I'm like, oh Lord, make it so.
Yeah, please. Well, Chris, to wrap this up, and it's probably something maybe you've been asked since with your background in film and being at a university at Baylor, what kind of advice would you give a young filmmaker?
That's a good question. I'll tell you what I tell my students best way to learn how to make a film is to make a film. And you've got to make things. You're going to make things that aren't great. And there's a story, I can't remember who the person is who talks about this. My mind just went blank, but he talks about the gap between your taste and your talent, your taste and your ability. Like when you start out, you have great taste, you know what's good, but your talent can't get, your ability is not there yet. And so you've got to keep making things until your talent catches up with your taste. I'm just a big believer in, like, I think that, you know, different people learn in different ways. I'm a classroom learner. Like, I wanted to be in the classroom where I was taught how to make films. Some people, they're able to teach themselves, or they just want to, you know, they want to do it on their own. However you learn, do that thing, but do it while making things. If you don't make things, you just won't get better. Everything I made when I started out stinks. You know, I mean, I just made a lot of terrible short films, and I thought I was brilliant, but they weren't that good. I mean, it wasn't until my third feature film where I'm proud of that one. You know, I made 2 feature films that I think had good elements, but the third one, I felt like I hit my stride. So you've just got to make stuff until your skill kind of catches up. And I think that's a really important part of becoming a filmmaker.
Okay, wise words. And I keep hearing similar things, not just from film folks, but just people in general in the arts world saying, you got to get out there and do it. You got to get out there and do it. And it's never going to be perfect. And you can't wait for the right time. You just have to start doing the process. That
was what I learned, because I had to start making films because of my career. Because as an academic, I don't do traditional research. I do creative projects. So I kept waiting and waiting and waiting until I got a job that said, produce now. And then I realized I was waiting for somebody to give me permission. Stop asking for permission. Just go out and do it. That's how it gets done. So
works for me. I've been trying to heed that advice from everyone I've talked to for the last 2 years virtually.
Well, you're doing it. You're doing this. You just got out there and did it. You know, the tools are there, and you learned how to use them, and you're, you know, doing good interviews. So.
Well, I appreciate it, and that's always the goal. It's like I'm always trying to, you know, better myself, and keep pushing forward with things. And yeah, like the students that I used to work with, it's like it's okay to fail as long as you're failing forward.
Yeah, as long as you're learning something from that failure.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Chris, you've made an amazing film that obviously I love. I'll probably watch it for the 8th time before this weekend's over. And for everybody out. Yeah, so 7 short films about our marriage. You can watch it right now. You can stream it after this live stream on Amazon. I know that's where I've seen it. And if you don't have Amazon or access to the Prime Video, then it's put out a couple $2 for most of the major digital platforms that's out there. I've seen it. So you can watch it in any which way. And if you want to check out more of Chris's work, his link to his film site is in my video description. But Chris, again, thank you so much for taking the time. I really appreciate it. And I'm looking forward to whenever the next film is that you come out with, or whatever project that you work on.
Well, you'll be on the list to see it. So
I certainly appreciate that. I love seeing things again, and definitely if you'd like to come back on and either promote something or just have something they think would be a good way to do like an update. I love having guests come back.
Great. I would love to. I'm a big fan of that as well, and kind of continuing those relationships, because you know, it's about building audience, but also about just making friends along the way, creative people who kind of see eye to eye.
Here. That's what I'm all about, the same thing. So again, thank you for taking the time. Have a good night down there in Texas. And, yeah, stay as safe as you can, you and your family, and hope to talk to you soon.
Okay. Thanks, Mark.
Great. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.